Welcome to A Composer in His Natural Habitat, a podcast about creativity and music featuring Thomas C. Bagley. Habitat number 5, A Dickens of a Composition. Hello everyone, I'm Thomas Bagley and this is A Composer in His Natural Habitat. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're still going to talk about projects I'm working on, and we'll take listener questions as usual. But after that, for the theme of the day, what we're going to do is we're going to do a deep dive into a specific composition through the eyes of its composer. Today, we'll be trying it with one of my own recently released compositions. But in the future, I do plan on bringing in other composers as well and have them talk about their own compositions. Hopefully, this can be a really good experience. I think it's very valuable to have an opportunity to listen to composers talk about their own work, and hopefully they'll get a little bit candid and say, yeah, this could have been a little bit better. I wish I could change that, because it's always true, right? For a composer, you never really finish with the work. There's always something that you feel like you could change, but you do finally just kind of let it go and move on to the next thing, sometimes coming back even years later to make some changes that have been bugging you. So compositions are never completely finished. And I think it's very useful to take some time and talk to composers about specific songs and what their thoughts are. What was the process that they went through when they were inventing it? And learn kind of some insights into what the composer is thinking. And I would like to say that going in, I'd like to hear from you on this. Is this the kind of episode that you find enjoyable? Is it helpful? Is it the kind of thing you'd like to have more on the podcast? I'm really excited about this, and I think there's a lot we can learn, but I'd really like to know what you, the listeners, think. So please send me an email at thomas@bagleymusic.com or get on to our Discord channel. I'd love to hear what you think, if this is valuable to you and you feel like you're learning some things from the podcast. Let me know if you're enjoying it too. I want this to be something that's fun to listen to as well as informative and useful. There's no guest host for today's show to introduce, so let's get right into the show. What are you working on? All right. Updating you on the projects I've been working on. You're pretty aware of most of the stuff I've been working on. First of all, the music drama Across Time that I've been writing. The story is getting fleshed out. I'm getting really excited about it. The main character is a single mother. I told you about this last time. And I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about what's going on because there are so many cool moments in there that I want you to be able to be surprised by them. But I will say that the story starts off with her and her son, and we get to know them a little bit. But before we get too far into it, probably the inciting incident that starts the show itself is that her son actually is kidnapped. She goes to his bed to check on him in the middle of the night, and he's not there. And you can imagine the emotional moment that is for a mother. And a big part of what's going on in the story is she's trying to get her son back. And she learns pretty quickly on that he was not just taken physically from their home, but actually across time, hence the title. And so her challenge is to figure out how to get him back from the future where he has been taken, and really, really excited about some of the twists and turns, some of the characters that have been developing in the story. I have several song ideas now. It's really going well, and I'm really excited about this. Can't wait to share it with you. And I'll be sharing some of the songs as I work through them as we go along. I've also still been working on the textbook. It's still moving forward. Got some response from some publishers, and nothing I can announce yet or anything like that, but really excited about the possibilities there. One of the big decisions that I face is, do I take this textbook and do I self-publish it, or do I work with some of these publishers and certainly they can do a lot of work, and there's a lot of reason to go with a publisher. On the other hand, a lot of publishers don't have books on composition. There are just a couple out there. As I've been researching what's out there, there's just a couple that do the same kind of thing as this book, and obviously in a very different way than I do it. And so the question I have to ask myself is, can the publishers get it out there to the people that are interested in that book? Or is their audience, their market, is it the same market for this book? And that's the same question that they're asking themselves as publishers as well. So it's an important question to ask when you're writing a textbook, but it's close to done. I'm really, really excited about it. I'm just making some of these decisions about how to get the distribution going on it. So we'll see how that goes. And finally, the other big project I've been working on, and I haven't really mentioned before on the podcast, it's a project I've been working on for years, actually. Every time I get frustrated grading in my theory class, the amount of time that it takes to go through and grade these music theory exercises, and I think, wow, this is all rule-based. There, the rules are right there in the textbook we're using. This is really easy to create an application. Well, not so easy to create an application that could grade this for me. It should work, and I've been putting some time into that again, mainly because I want to have it done and ready by the time the sabbatical's over, so that I can have time to continue composing and not worry so much about getting grading done. I'll have this tool that will help so much. Let me tell you, it's an exciting idea as well that I've had for a number of years. It's really moving forward really well this week. I made some big discoveries, some big advancements on how that can work. And so what I hope to do with this application at some point is to have the ability for students to be able to submit their exercises themselves, have the application grade it, and give them instant feedback. In theory classes that I took when I was growing up and the way that I teach, because of what's available, a lot of times the student will turn in their work, and then they'll wait a week or so for the teacher to finish grading their exercise and giving them feedback, and then they get that back. And by that time, they moved on to something else. There's not a lot of learning that happens there. The feedback is so important, but the students tend to just look and see what they missed and not really learn how to fix it. A little bit of that happens in the classroom when you're teaching, but to be able to take these exercises and have the students get instant feedback while it's still fresh in their minds, to be able to get that instant feedback and to then fix it, and to make a practice assignment to a student, say, here's an exercise, make it perfect. Turn it in. When you're done, to the automatic grader, it'll tell you what errors you have, and then you got to go back and fix it. Fix it over and over again until you get 100% on it, and then submit that. I think that there's a lot more learning that students can do with that kind of approach, because they're learning to fix their errors, not just find out what their errors are a week later. That's a lot of big projects to be working on at a time. And believe me, it's important to not just have a lot of ideas and work on a lot of ideas, but actually finish those ideas. So I'm aware of this and I think about this, but I do have a priority list. But when things bog down a little bit in one project, it's good to have something to move on to and be productive. It's one of the secrets to being productive, is having more than one thing that you are working on, making sure you're meeting deadlines. But when something is not working in one of your projects, to be able to move over to another project and make progress in that. And so that's what I'm working on. Really, really excited about a lot of these ideas. Okay, we do have a question from Nick this time. He was responding to last episode in which we talked about the economic value of creativity. And he wrote, I'd be interested to know if you will be discussing what is essentially a war against art. His observation is that we devalue art in two immediate ways. The first is that artistic career goals are not treated as a legitimate pathway to economic viability. And the second is that the ubiquity of streaming services have conditioned popular culture to believe that they should have unrestricted access to art for free, thereby deteriorating its value. And he goes on, well, Nick, that's certainly a mouthful. A lot of words in there, a lot to unpack. We could probably spend the rest of the episode on just this question. In fact, we could probably go over it for multiple episodes. But we'll see what we can do in just a few minutes here. I basically see three parts here to your question. First of all, you describe the devaluing of art as essentially the result of a war against art. And I don't think you mean that people are purposefully attacking art. I think it's more of a symptom, I think, of a lot of the cultural wars that are going on right now. Politically, I think the dividing lines are often from the more populated parts of the country with the less populated parts, or you might say the urban versus the rural parts. There's certainly a perception, at least, that where you live, the other part of the country is trying to force their lifestyle, their values on you. That might also be finding its way in the way that people react to art. But again, this has been going on forever. Art has always been considered, for instance, the purview of the elite. And in fact, we live in a time when there's more access to art than there ever has been before, both in terms of enjoying it and in terms of viewing it and listening to it. It's certainly more available to anybody everywhere than it's ever been before. And sure, there's still a perception that certain kinds of art, I think you find the division line in music, for instance. People will like certain kinds of music, and then they'll think that other kinds of music are for a different class of person than them. And we've often used music to define, especially over the last few decades, we've used music to define where we are culturally. But I don't know if that's a war as much as just kind of a symptom of what's going on culturally elsewhere. So let's talk about these two areas really quickly. You talked about whether artistic career goals are legitimate pathways to economic viability. And that's a perception thing. I think if you talk to somebody and you said, you know what, I am going to do animation for video games, or I'm going to work for a company that does special effects for a movie, or I'm going to do audio for video games. There's a lot of things that people don't even think of as art because you're creating things for popular consumption. And they don't put those on the same level as art, like fine art. And so I think that there is some concern, and it's legitimate concern for some that people have, about whether a person can actually build an artistic career. But then again, that's because they don't know. It's more about having a broader viewpoint of what that means, because I think, again, there's more art being used now in a wider variety of ways than ever before. And so I think that's more about education in a lot of ways, of people just helping them to see the different ways that art is contributing to their lifestyle. And it is legitimate, but you do have to have a different approach to it. For instance, composers, there are not jobs out there for composers, and people are looking for jobs. Well, people might react the same way. For instance, if you said, I'm going to do a consulting career. I am going to build a career in which I consult for businesses, and I am going to help them to make strategic decisions. Well, absolutely. If you can get that going, that's going to be very economically viable for you. But it's tough to get started. Just as any business would be difficult to start on its own. But the thing people don't understand is that artistic careers are businesses. You're starting your own business. And I think that if you can take it with that approach, that, hey, I'm starting my own business, there is risk involved, absolutely. And there is some legitimate concern over whether that risk is going to pay off for you. But that's true of any business you're going to start. The key is to find a need. When you start a business, the business is much more likely to succeed if, A, you are meeting a need that people have. So define within your artistic career, what is it that people, what is their unmet need that you can bring to them? And that's maybe a little more difficult to find when you're talking about art. And then secondly, having enough funding to actually make it work. That's the other thing that will kill a business, even if they meet a legitimate need. There's still the funding to build enough of a foundation to get the business going. That's an important part of that. So that's how you make an artistic career goal, into a legitimate pathway for economic viability. You've got to have solutions to those problems. And when people worry about that, they could worry about any career path along those lines. People don't worry when they see that there are jobs available. But jobs have less risk and they don't give as much of a reward either. And so that's the trick. What I would suggest if somebody's talking that way, say, hey, I want to start a business and this is my product and this is how I'm going to go about it and here's the funding I'm going to do. And I think people will turn around on that. I don't think that that's all about devaluing art. It's just about concern about how you can form a legitimate business doing something artistic. Second, you talk about the streaming services. That's almost in contrast to a war against art in some ways. Streaming services are making art more available than ever before. I think what is causing the perception that music, for instance, is free is because of the financial setup, because they are ad funded, the fact that they don't pay very much to the creators of content, but people have embraced it. Streaming services shouldn't have worked, but everybody said, oh, this is great. I can listen to whatever I want, whenever I want, for free. And so people have embraced it. But the problem it created financially was that it replaced buying music. Buying music was a big thing for a few decades. People would buy recordings. But now streaming services have replaced that. And people feel like they can just listen for free. And they figure the ads are covering that. And they are covering that. The question is, what can the content creators do to make sure that they're viable? Again, I don't think that's a war against art. In fact, the people that are doing it are actually trying to promote art in a lot of ways. And it certainly has made it a lot easier for an artist to get their art out there and listened to with the public. So it has caused a financial problem for artists, specifically musicians, because they haven't found how to replace that. The most popular musicians have replaced it with concerts and with Kickstarters. But the other artists, well, they were already under the gun in a lot of ways because the access was limited by a lack of funding. Now access is not limited by a lack of funding, but there's no financial reward as well, just from streaming. So in a way, that hasn't changed much for most artists. It's still a problem. How do you make a living creating your art? I don't think streaming services actually changed that. All right. That's as long as I want to spend on that. It's a good topic. We can talk a long time about the streaming services, especially. There's a long history. We went over that a little bit last time about the relationship with radio and how we should perceive that. I do think it's a good thing to get more people listening to art. We got to figure out how to get the financial reward for the content creators as well. It's time for the theme of the day. Okay, let's get into it. Today we're going to be discussing a piece of music that I just released on sheet music this past week called A Dickens of a Christmas. It's a work for piano four hands, really kind of fun. One of the things we're going to do is talk a bit about the history of how this song developed. How it came to be a piece for piano four hands is really quite interesting, actually. And we'll also listen through pieces of it and also some of the previous versions of it so you can kind of see how the piece develops. And before getting into that, I just wanted to make sure and remind you that I am looking for your feedback on this. I would really love to find out what you think of this kind of approach where we go ahead and analyze a piece of music, talk to the composer, find out his process. I'd like to know if you really do find this valuable and if you find it interesting. I think it would be fascinating. I know that I would love to hear how some composers work and what they think about some of their works as they go forward. So to start off with, let me tell you a little bit about the background of this work. The first ideas that I had that eventually became this piece of music were part of a project I was working on as the composer in residence for the Salt Lake Community College Black Box Theater. I was working on creating some music for a production of a play called Inspecting Carol. It's a play about a production of the classic Dickens story, A Christmas Carol. And One of the first things that I wrote for this piece was incidental music for a scene that was supposed to kind of get the feeling of the time period of A Christmas Carol. So what I originally wrote, and where the first part of the theme developed, was actually a fugue that was going to be played on harpsichord and to create the mood of the time. And this is kind of what I came up with. And yes, I do realize that's kind of anachronistic. The music is in the style of Bach, 18th century Baroque music. And Dickens' story, of course, is set in the 19th century. But this is the production of A Christmas Carol within Inspecting Carol is a low budget play. And so it kind of works that things will be a little bit off sometimes. But out of that theme, out of that cue that I wrote, this little fugue that I wrote for, I think it was a dinner party or something like that, where it was actually used just to set the mood, I got some themes, some ideas that I tried to spread throughout the entire work. And so you can hear that actually in another cue where I'm creating some spooky music for the ghost coming in. It's supposed to be kind of scary, but if you listen very carefully to some of the melodies that are developed in it, they come right out of that fugue. One thing that I really wish is that we could be broadcasting this podcast in stereo. There's some really cool stereo effects in that particular cue. But if you go look on my website at baglymusic.com, you can find a recording of that spooky music and hear some of the stereo effects that are happening. It's really cool. So if you listen very carefully to the string melody, da, 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 that does that, that comes out of little snippets, little motifs from the fugue itself. Another point in the play, they wanted to have some music for the opening of the play. And so that's kind of where the next thing developed with this. And I had a short little, they didn't want a full-blown piece. They just wanted just the opening, and they'd fade it out after the play opened. So I just wrote the first minute or so of the music, and it's an orchestral kind of opening. And here it comes. And that's for the opening of the play within the play. All right. And that was the whole thing, that long. A lot of fun. You can hear again the connective tissue between the melodies and the fugue. I'm trying to reuse these themes to give kind of a sense of unity to the music and to the production itself, bringing stuff inside and outside the play within the play. So that was it. That's as much as I wrote. A lot of fun. Finished the play out. Good production. Very happy with it. A little bit later on, I'm writing music for the Salt Lake Pops Orchestra. And with the Salt Lake Pops Orchestra, we did a lot of covers, a lot of arrangements of familiar stuff. We were building a pretty good following. We'd had a very successful Halloween concert in which I'd written, for the first time, I'd written some original music for the Salt Lake Pops Orchestra, a little entrance thing for entrance of the haunted orchestra. And so we were getting together our Christmas concert that year. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could have some original music too? I mean, we're going to play a lot of music people are going to recognize. Let's try have an original Christmas song at all. And as I thought about this, I thought, well, why not take this little entrance, this little introduction that I'd written for Inspecting Carol, and why not make it something bigger, something longer, a full piece. And so that's what I did. And it went well. There were some things that I definitely wanted to change about it as we get going. One of the things about the Salt Lake Pops Orchestra, we tried to have kind of a pop feel to it. So I added a drum kit in there, and it felt kind of weird a little bit. And as I was writing this piece, I really liked some of the ideas that were happening, and I just could imagine kind of a story to go along with it all of a sudden. The music kind of developed this story in my mind of just imagining a Santa Claus on a sleigh ride on Christmas Eve, and things kind of get a little bit out of hand. But maybe I just want to point out some parts of this that I definitely wanted to change, that I felt, especially as the performance went on. It's like, wow, I wish I'd had time to really fix some things in here. There were some things I wanted to change about it. One explanation I should give before playing this is that we did not do a recording of the Salt Lake Pops performance. So this is not played by an orchestra. This is a MIDI realization of that arrangement. So I'll just point some things out as we go on. You notice that the beginning starts very much like, in fact, I think I just took it wholesale and used exactly what was in the performance for the play, and then I just expanded on it. There you can hear the drum kit come in right here. And that always felt a little bit weird to me. And you can hear things getting a little bit out of hand now. It's kind of fun. Of course, because it's Christmas music, you have to have the sleigh bells, so I had lots of sleigh bells in there. Right here, one of the things I wished I would be able to take out is I had the drum kit playing again. There's a kick in there you can't hear very well that I really wanted to take out of it. Maybe just have just the hi-hat. Because I'm a horn player, I of course had to have a nice little horn segment right in the middle. This went really well up to this point. The other thing we had in the Salt Lake Pops Orchestra was a guitar. And so there's a guitar playing, you can't hear it really well here, but I don't think it came out too much. I worried a lot about it, but I think it blended in pretty well in the performance. So in this part, you can hear the MIDI guitar a little bit louder than I hope you can hear it in the live performance. Now, this part really didn't work for me. What I really wish I had done here, and let me just turn off the music for a second so we can talk about this a little bit better. There. Now, what I wish I had done here is I wish I had had more of the orchestra playing. Right now, I thought it'd be nice to have a little strings section, but it didn't quite have the full sound that I wanted. What I wish I'd done is I wish I had made it tooty instead of just the strings with the guitar. The guitar hopefully got lost still in there, but in the MIDI recording, you can really hear the guitar a bit more than you should. All right, let's pick it up again. I really love the brass choir sound there. That's one thing that I felt really worked really well. And the ending was nice. The concert went pretty well. I didn't feel like that the piece built up enough. There should have been this tooty thing at the end, and I gave it just to the strings. I really wanted to change that. I wish I had another opportunity to get this performed. And those are things that as I went back and I was re-looking at this piece, one of the challenges of writing a piece for orchestra, of course, is getting it performed more than once. I was writing for the Salt Lake Pops Orchestra, so I had that one performance. But then how do you get other people to play it? And how do I get a chance to make some changes, improve it, and get someone else to play it? With that in mind, what I decided to do was to do an arrangement for piano for it. Now, this is a bit of a challenge for me because I am very, very aware. In fact, a lot of my ideas come from instrumentation, from orchestration itself. One of the first choices I make when I'm going to compose a piece of music is what are the instruments that are going to be available to me. I work so much better when I have an ensemble that I'm actually writing for, especially if I know that there's going to be a performance that's going to happen or a recording. And so a lot of my choices are influenced by the timbre. I could hear the different instruments interacting. There's a lot of fun stuff in there. I wish in the MIDI realization, you can't hear the harp in there. It does some really cool stuff that's in there, but you can't hear it at all in this MIDI realization. Again, it's a really quick put together of it. But there's a lot of timbral, really interesting things going on. Well, when I decided that this would be an interesting thing, to just so I could get more performances, because I could get this out and play it a little bit more, if I made it for piano and did a four-hands piano arrangement of it, one of the challenges I faced then was I was losing a lot of that timbral difference, a lot of the changes between the instruments that really matter to me. And so as I was going about trying to make an arrangement for the piano, I wanted to keep some of that timbral change. And one of the ways you can do that is by playing with register on the piano. Certainly the piano sounds very different up high than it does down low. For instance, one of the things you'll notice as we go through the piano part is that things have moved into different octaves. There's a point early on where it starts to get a little bit funny, where I have this solo timpani hit that happens. Well, when I moved that over to the piano, what I did is I put it at the very, very bottom of the piano. It's the second lowest note on the entire piano. I wanted to maintain that same comic feel, and that's the way I could accomplish that with the piano. So I moved it way down on the piano. The actual range of this piece for piano four hands, it can be played either on two pianos. They've actually released sheet music that's organized so you can have your part on your piano, or it can be played four hands on one piano, and I've got it also published in such a way that you can play it that way. That's really easy with page turns and things like that. But if you took the entire range that is used in the piece, it goes from the second lowest note on the entire piano all the way to the very highest note on the piano is also hit at some point in the song. So I'm using the whole keyboard. There's one note I think that doesn't get used in the keyboard. Well, maybe down low there's a couple of notes that don't get hit, but the range is the entire 88 keys essentially. And one of the reasons for that is because I kept trying to find ways to get this timbral difference, the sense of changing color, even though it's on the piano, which is very consistent. That's what I was trying to accomplish. I was trying to give a sense of the change of the strings. So let me go ahead and get, again, this is a MIDI realization of piano performance, but for some reason, MIDI realizations of piano performances are so much better than MIDI realizations of orchestral performances. But let me go ahead and I'll play that. And again, I'm going to give some commentary along the way, and you can kind of hear how it translated to the piano. There it is. That top note there is the highest note on the piano. It's the high C. I think that this is a very fun piece to perform. I think that if I were a piano player, this could become something that I would want to do every Christmas, just because it's just so fun. Bouncy. One of the things that's really good about it, I think, is we got rid of these sleigh bells. The sleigh bells were kind of cliche. With the piano, I don't have it. And so I had to get that kind of feel without the constant hit of something that's supposed to be sleigh bells. So in the orchestral version, I had the strings playing really energetic playing in the strings to give the kind of feel of energy. What you do in notation, you put a slash through the stem, and they play each note twice, essentially. When you well, I'm trying to get that same kind of feel with the piano, but it's a little bit easier with the piano to do it at octaves, and I think that really made it kind of interesting here. You can hear it in the upper part. This is a challenging piece.
I think I'll stop the music here again for just a minute.
You hear the scale as it goes. Those are sextuplets. Quite challenging to play, but it's just a scale at that. So if you practice your scales, I think that is quite learnable. In fact, it reminds me a little bit of when I was younger. There was a piece of music that I was learning, and I just realized all of a sudden it had a really fast part in the right hand. And I just realized as I was playing it, wait a minute, this is just an E major chord arpeggiated it. And as soon as that clicked for me, for some reason I was able to play it. And I think that that's kind of an important thing to understand, is if you can break this thing down, it's not as hard to play as it sounds. Here's the tutti part. Remember, this is the part that I talked about with the strings, where I really should have written it for tutti for orchestra. And when I release it for orchestra, it is going to be tutti again. But for the piano part, to make it tutti, I just made it tutti with the two players playing over octaves, and it made it much more powerful and much more enjoyable. There you go again, a difference of timbre there. I moved that way down. Before it was like oboe and clarinet. I moved it down several octaves to get it that sense of timbre change. right, so that's the piece. I hope you enjoyed listening to it, with interruptions by me, of course. But if you want to listen to the entire piece, it is available. I put up a video on YouTube with the recording, posted it on Facebook as well. Certainly, you can go get the sheet music and play it as well and have a lot of fun with it. But there's a lot in there. There are things I still listen to it. Things I'd still like to change. I think that in order to get the timbral change and the sense of handoff sometimes, and also to make it more playable for the players, I sometimes had a handoff that was an octave or two apart, especially the ascending line. And I think it becomes a little disjointed that way. I really liked in the orchestra how it really had that sense of flow, because you could hand off between instruments at the same pitch, but you're just changing timbre and color as you went along. And I like to do that with the strings, especially since they're so closely related. You get a sense of a great big huge string instrument going in doing scales really fast and just using the entire range. I think we lost a little bit of that moving into the piano, because I was afraid of having the players crash into their hands hitting each other. In fact, I think one of the things, if I were to go back, I would change the piano duo version back again a little bit, so that if you're playing on two separate pianos, at least you're not going to crash into each other's hands. You can really have a handoff at those spots so that they're actually continuing from the same pitch, and you get that sense of handoff and some of that stereo effect of having two pianos playing. So again, there are always things that a composer would like to change about it. I think it's kind of fun to see the evolution of this piece, how it started as essentially some of the melodic ideas as a fugue for harpsichord, moved through, became an orchestral piece, fully orchestrated, and then comes back and now it's back on piano and for a piano duo, and there's some really fun stuff there. So I'd love to hear what you think of the piece. I'd love to, especially to hear what you think of the idea of analyzing music in this way on the podcast. Is it helpful? Are you learning some things to give you some ideas? I'd also welcome questions. If you have any questions, send me an email at thomas@bagleymusic.com, or even better, join us on our Discord channel, The Composer's Habitat. Join us and let's just continue a discussion. Ask questions. I'd be glad to answer as well as I can. What was I thinking as I wrote the thing? Sometimes it's hard to remember after a while. So it's good. I wanted to get this out so that I have it for myself for years from now. When I go back and look at it, I can say, oh, that's what I was thinking, because I talked about it. Hopefully you enjoyed listening to it, and we'll see you in the next show. Thanks for listening. If you have enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us, and you can be alerted each time we release a new episode. We welcome your thoughts and comments on today's show on our Discord channel, A Composer's Natural Habitat. A Composer in His Natural Habitat is made possible by the support and donation of listeners like you. If you would like to help support the show, please subscribe to our Patreon for access to exclusive episodes and other content. You can also help to support us by checking out our show merchandise store on Etsy.com. You can find it at etsy.com/shop/The Composer's Habitat. Musical themes by Thomas C. Bagley. Special thanks to Frank Garish, who is the director of the Salt Lake Community College production of Inspecting Carol, Nathaniel Drew, director of the Salt Lake Pops Orchestra, and of course to Santa Claus and his 8 tiny reindeer. We hope your next ride is a little less eventful. Until next time, keep creating.